For most of his life, Richard Collins believed that money could fix anything. He built companies, earned millions, and filled his mansion with art, cars, and noise, anything to drown out the silence that began the day his wife died. It had been 7 years since cancer took her. 7 long years of polished shoes, business meetings, and an empty seat at the dinner table. He smiled in photos, attended charity galas, and shook hands with mayors and ministers. But when he returned home at night, the lights felt too bright, the rooms too big, and his heart too small. Until that one evening, when life brought him face to face with something he could neither buy nor ignore. Richard was sitting in the back of his car, stuck at a red light downtown. The window fogged slightly from the inside. He rubbed it clear and saw 2 little figures huddled under a broken umbrella near a trash bin. A girl, maybe 9 years old, holding something in her lap, something wrapped in a blanket. Her clothes were torn, her hair wet from the drizzle. The driver said quietly, "Sir, those kids have been here all day. The smaller one hasn't moved much." Richard didn't reply. He just kept watching. When the light turned green, his car started to move, but something inside him resisted. He told the driver to stop. For the first time in years, Richard Collins stepped out into the rain, not for a speech, not for a photograph, but for something he didn't let understand. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were big and frightened, but she didn't back away. "Are you lost?" Richard asked. She shook her head. "My sister's sick. She's not waking up." Richard crouched down, feeling the chill of the rain seep through his coat. "Where are your parents?" "They went to heaven," she whispered, tightening the blanket around the still form in her arms. "She got cold last night. I tried to keep her warm, but she's not breathing." For a moment, Richard felt his chest tighten, a sharp, familiar ache. He remembered the last breath his wife took, the same helpless feeling of not being able to do anything. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lena, and this is my sister, Sophie." Then she looked up with those innocent, trembling eyes and said something Richard would never forget. "Sir, can you help me bury her?" Richard froze. He didn't know how to respond. "Bury her?" he repeated softly. Lena nodded, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. "I heard people bury the ones they love so they can sleep with the angels. I just don't know where to go." In that instant, the billionaire, the CEO, the public figure, all of it vanished. He was just a man kneeling in the rain beside a child who had lost everything. He touched the blanket gently and felt something, a faint warmth. His eyes widened. "Wait, she's still warm." Without another thought, he lifted the small bundle from Lena's arms. "Get in the car," he said to her, voice trembling but firm. "We're going to the hospital, now." The driver pressed the accelerator. Rain streaked across the windshield like silver lines of urgency. Lena sat quietly in the back seat, watching Richard cradle her sister like something fragile and sacred. He kept whispering, "Hang on, little one, hang on." At the emergency entrance, nurses rushed forward. Doctors took Sophie away on a stretcher. "Sir, please wait here," a nurse said. Richard nodded, but his eyes didn't move from the double doors that just swallowed the child. Lena clutched the edge of his coat. "Will they take care of her?" she asked. "Yes," Richard said softly. "They'll do everything they can." Hours passed. Richard sat in the waiting room beside Lena, who had fallen asleep on his arm. When the doctor finally came out, Richard stood immediately. "Is she—" The doctor smiled faintly. "She's alive. Severe pneumonia, but she'll recover. Another few hours she might not have made it."
Richard exhaled, feeling relief rush through him like warmth after a long winter. Lena opened her eyes, hearing the good news, and whispered, "I told her not to leave me." The doctor continued, "We'll need to contact child services, though. These girls don't seem to have any family." Richard hesitated. He didn't know why, but the thought of them being taken away into the system made his chest ache again. Later that night, as the rain eased, Richard Collins stood outside the hospital window, looking at the two sisters sleeping in the ward. He saw himself, the man who once believed he had everything, now feeling something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He thought of his wife's last words, "Promise me, Richard, don't stop loving the world, even if it breaks your heart." He hadn't understood it then, but now, standing there, watching those two girls breathe peacefully, he finally did. The next morning, two social workers arrived. They were polite but cold, with clipboards and forms. "We'll take the girls into state custody," one said. "Do you have any relation to them, sir?" "No," Richard replied slowly, "but I want to help." "I'm sorry," the woman said flatly. "That's not how this works." Lena began to cry again as the workers led her away. She turned to Richard, shouting through tears, "You promised she'd be safe!" Richard felt something break inside him. He had money, influence, and a name that opened doors, but at that moment none of it mattered. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to let the world take these girls away again. That night, Richard Collins didn't sleep. He had spent his life building empires. Now he was about to fight for something far more valuable: a child's future. Because sometimes the richest thing a man can give is his heart.
The world had taken enough from Richard Collins: his wife, his peace, and almost his purpose. Now it was trying to take something else: two little girls who had just given him a reason to breathe again. The next morning, Richard walked into his lawyer's office, still wearing yesterday's rain-stained coat. "I need custody of two orphaned sisters," he said firmly. The lawyer blinked, confused. "Sir, that's not simple. The state has procedures: background checks, home inspections, foster eligibility." Richard interrupted. "I built half the schools in this city. I can handle a background check." The lawyer sighed. "Mr. Collins, money doesn't speed up emotionless paperwork." He leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Then we'll give them something no system can process: compassion." 2 weeks later, Richard stood in family court, not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally rediscovered his heart. Lena sat beside a social worker, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Sophie was in a stroller, still recovering. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Collins, these children have no legal tie to you. Why are you pursuing custody?" He took a breath. "Because I made a promise, and I failed enough promises in my life already." The courtroom went silent. He continued, voice cracking slightly. "When I found them, they had nothing, not even hope. But in trying to save them, I realized they saved me." He paused, looking at Lena. "I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to make sure they never stand in the rain alone again." The state attorney stood. The world had taken enough from Richard Collins: his wife, his peace, and almost his purpose. Now it was trying to take something else: two little girls who had just given him a reason to breathe again. The next morning, Richard walked into his lawyer's office, still wearing yesterday's rain-stained coat. "I need custody of 2 orphan sisters," he said firmly. The lawyer blinked, confused. "Sir, that's not simple. The state has procedures, background checks, home inspections, foster eligibility." Richard interrupted. "I built half the schools in this city. I can handle a background check." The lawyer sighed. "Mr. Collins, money doesn't speed up emotionless paperwork." Richard leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Then we'll give them something no system can process: compassion." 2 weeks later, Richard stood in family court, not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally rediscovered his heart. Lena sat beside a social worker, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Sophie was in a stroller, still recovering. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Collins, these children have no legal tie to you. Why are you pursuing custody?" Richard took a breath. "Because I made a promise, and I failed enough promises in my life already." The courtroom went silent. He continued, voice cracking slightly. "When I found them, they had nothing, not even hope. But in trying to save them, I realized they saved me." He paused, looking at Lena. "I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to make sure they never stand in the rain alone again." The state attorney stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, compassion doesn't equate to responsibility. These children need structure, not sentiment." Richard turned toward her. "Structure without heart is a cage. I've lived in one for years." He reached into his pocket and placed a photo on the table. His late wife smiling beside a playground they once built for underprivileged kids. "She wanted to fill the world with laughter. I lost that after she died. But these girls, they brought it back." The judge studied him carefully, tapping her pen on the desk. "Mr. Collins, are you prepared for what this means? It's not charity. It's a lifetime commitment." Richard nodded. "Your Honor, I've already lived one life chasing numbers. Let me spend the rest chasing meaning." After what felt like hours, the judge finally spoke. "Mr. Collins, the court finds sufficient grounds for temporary custody. The permanent hearing will follow a review period." Richard's shoulders relaxed, eyes glistening. Lena sat beside a social worker, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Sophie was in a stroller, still recovering. For years, Richard's mansion had been filled with silence. Now it echoed with laughter, cartoons, and the sound of little feet racing down hallways. He converted one of the guest rooms into a pink-painted bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Lena insisted that Sophie's crib be right beside her bed. Every evening, Richard read them stories. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence just to watch them smile. It was something he hadn't done in years. Live in the moment. Neighbors whispered, the press took photos, but Richard didn't care. For the first time in forever, he felt like a father again. Months later, during Sophie's birthday celebration, Lena handed Richard a small handmade card. It had 2 stick figures holding hands and 1 tall figure in the middle. Underneath, written in crooked letters, were the words, "Thank you for not leaving us." Richard's throat tightened. He lifted Lena onto his lap and said softly, "I made a promise that day to protect you, and I'll keep it, always." She looked at him and smiled, whispering, "I told Sophie that you're our angel." Richard laughed gently, brushing her hair back. "No, sweetheart, you too are mine." Years later, the Collins Foundation built new shelters and schools across the state, all dedicated to children who had no one left. At the entrance of the first building, a bronze plaque read, "In memory of love lost and love found again." Below it, 3 names: Richard, Lena, and Sophie Collins. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but sometimes it gives us someone to live for. Because the greatest promise you can ever keep is the one that reminds you what it means to be human.